Welcome to the lab. I'm Dr. Chem, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be your guide through this explainer today. We're going to peer right into the microscopic machinery that literally makes life possible. We're talking about enzymes, those highly specialized proteins that act as our biological catalysts. Without them, the chemical reactions our cells need to function would happen so incredibly slowly that life, well, it simply couldn't exist. Today, we're going to run a complete cinematic experiment right here to uncover exactly how these tiny machines operate under pressure.
So what determines the ultimate speed of life? Have you ever stopped to wonder how enzymes know exactly how fast to drive our cellular reactions? Or how they adapt when they're suddenly flooded with the raw materials they need to process? Okay, let's dive into this, because the answer lies in a truly beautiful, dynamic relationship between the enzyme and its target.
Section 1. The mechanics of catalysis. Let's take a quick look at how enzymes actually lower energy barriers. Right, before we get our hands dirty with the physical test tubes, we've got to lay down the theoretical foundation of what an enzyme actually does. In any chemical reaction, there's an energy barrier you have to overcome just to get things started, right? We call that the activation energy. Enzymes perform their magic by lowering this activation energy. They offer an alternate, much easier pathway for the reaction to happen, speeding things up tremendously. But they don't do it from afar. They get right into the thick of it. To really understand this, we rely on a brilliant mathematical framework from 1913 proposed by Leonor Michaelis and Menten. The whole process kicks off with a fast, completely reversible binding step. The enzyme, our E, bumps into its substrate, the S, and they lock together to form an enzyme-substrate complex, or ES. But here is where it gets super interesting. This second step is much slower than the first. That ES complex undergoes catalysis to release the final product, the P, and regenerate the free enzyme so it can be used all over again. Because this step is slower, it acts as a physical bottleneck. It's the rate-limiting step for the entire reaction.
Section 2. Substrate concentration in action. We know the theory, so let's put it to the test in our cinematic lab experiment.
So what we're going to do is systematically tweak the amount of substrate, our raw material, and measure exactly how that impacts the overall speed of our enzyme's reaction. Here's our physical setup for a PNPP assay. Now, to get clean, reliable data, we have to be totally meticulous about our control variables. Notice how the buffer volume, the magnesium chloride, and the water remain perfectly constant across every single tube. We're also keeping the environment strictly controlled. A constant 37 degrees Celsius in the water bath, a steady pH of 5.5, and a strict time limit of exactly 5 minutes. The only thing we are changing, the single variable here, is that substrate concentration. We're starting with absolutely zero substrate in tube A to act as our baseline, and we're ramping it all the way up to a massive 50 millimolar in tube H.
Let's zoom in and look at this from a molecular perspective. At those low substrate concentrations, our enzymes are mostly just sitting around waiting. There are plenty of empty active sites. When we add a bit more substrate, the reaction rate speeds up linearly. Boom, boom, boom. Because every new substrate molecule easily finds an open enzyme. But watch what happens as we really flood the system with medium and then high substrate concentrations. The active sites fill up faster than the enzyme can process them. We hit that rate-limiting bottleneck we talked about earlier. Every single enzyme molecule is occupied, constantly locked in that enzyme-substrate complex. Adding more substrate at this point won't speed things up one bit. The enzyme is officially saturated.
And this brilliantly illustrates the resulting data from our test tubes. When we plot our reaction rate against the substrate concentration, we don't just get a straight line. We get this iconic hyperbolic curve. See how it starts off steep and fast on the left? That's when we still have plenty of free enzyme. But as we push into those much higher substrate concentrations from tubes F, G, and H, the curve completely levels off into a plateau. That flat red line right at the top, that is the absolute physical speed limit of our saturated enzyme.
Moving on to Section 3, calculating Vmax and Km, it's time to actually quantify our enzymes.
We need a universal way to describe that curve we just looked at. To do that, we map our kinetic parameters. First, take a look at the top dashed line. That's Vmax, the maximum velocity. It's the absolute theoretical speed limit of the reaction when the enzyme is completely and totally saturated with substrate. Now look at the y-axis, right at the point labeled Vmax over 2. This is exactly half of our maximum speed. If you trace that line over to the curve and then straight down to the x-axis, you hit our second vital parameter, Km, or the Michaelis constant. So the really crucial takeaway here is that Km is the exact substrate concentration required for the enzyme to operate at half of its maximum velocity. A low Km means the enzyme is highly efficient. It grabs its substrate easily, even when there isn't much around. A high Km, on the other hand, means it needs a massive flood of substrate just to get going.
Now, I want to blow your mind for just a second. Look at this massive number. 10 to the 8th up to 10 to the 9th. This represents the absolute physical limit of diffusion in an aqueous solution. Basically, it's the fastest that an enzyme and a substrate can physically bump into each other by random motion in water. Certain enzymes in our bodies, like catalase for example, have evolved to operate so incredibly fast that they actually hit this theoretical limit. Their reaction rate is limited only by how fast the substrate can physically swim over to them. Biochemists call this state catalytic perfection, and honestly, it is a staggering feat of evolutionary engineering.
Section 4. The inhibitor plot twist. Because what happens when our perfect biological machines are sabotaged?
In the real world, and especially in medicine, enzymes are frequently confronted by rogue molecules called inhibitors. These guys interfere with catalysis and completely warp our carefully calculated Vmax and Km. Now, inhibitors generally fall into a few different camps based on how they attack. In competitive inhibition, the inhibitor is basically a structural copycat. It fights the actual substrate directly for the enzyme's active site. Because they're actively competing, you need a lot more substrate to reach the same speed, which means the apparent Km goes up. However, if you add enough substrate, you can eventually drown out the inhibitor, so the ultimate Vmax remains unchanged. Uncompetitive inhibition is a totally different strategy. These inhibitors completely ignore the empty enzyme and only latch onto the enzyme-substrate complex after it's already formed, locking it up. Because this removes active complexes from the reaction, the apparent Vmax goes down. But, strangely enough, because it stabilizes the complex and stops the substrate from leaving, the apparent Km actually goes down as well.
Pulling back from the math and the test tubes for a moment, I really want to emphasize the life or death stakes of this data. Understanding these exact kinetic principles is literally the foundation of modern pharmacology and drug design. Take DFMO, for example, a drug used to treat African sleeping sickness. It is an irreversible suicide inactivator. It acts like a biochemical Trojan horse, tricking the parasite's enzyme into processing it just like a normal substrate. But midway through the reaction, DFMO turns highly reactive and permanently destroys the enzyme, killing the parasite while leaving the human host largely unharmed. Or consider a classic case of competitive inhibition, methanol poisoning. Methanol itself isn't actually the primary danger. It's what your body's enzyme alcohol dehydrogenates turns it into, highly toxic formaldehyde. To stop this, doctors will intravenously administer a massive dose of ethanol. The ethanol directly competes for the enzyme's active site. It keeps the enzyme so busy processing the ethanol that the methanol is just left alone, allowing it to be safely flushed out by the kidneys.
Which brings us to our final thought. Today we've seen how enzymes operate, how they hit their physical limits through saturation, and how we can mathematically map their efficiency using Vmax and Km. We've also seen exactly how inhibitors can hijack this perfect machinery. So I want to leave you with this question. If some of our biological machines have already reached absolute catalytic perfection, limited only by the literal laws of physics and diffusion, how will we engineer the biochemical therapies of the future? Will we find new ways to alter the cellular environment? Or maybe design entirely new inhibitors that break the current rules of kinetics? Keep exploring, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.